I'm glad you could work me into your busy schedule. I hope you're comfortable, because I think it's best that we start at the beginning, don't you? How we got here, where we're going. If not, then I suggest you settle in, Morgan. You're not exactly in a position to make demands. I, like most, was but a child once. Arriving at my new home under my grandmother's care was an experience. The lot was large, but the residence small. I tried to make do, best I could. I suspect that she did the same. Naive as I was, I knew nothing would go back to how it could have been. Had my mother or father not been the people that they were, had their choices taken them down a different road, maybe we could have tried. Maybe. It's funny how the young mind will rationalize things, closing to the outside world as it collapses around you, doing its best to pay no heed to visitors who speak in languages that only vaguely mirror your own. So familiar, yet so foreign. I was adventurous once. Venturing off on my own, I knew not what our chance encounter would go on to mean. You don't even remember that day, do you, Morgan? Because I do. I remember speaking with your peers. I remember your face, uncaring, as they filled my head with thoughts of wonder and whimsy. I clung on to their every word in hopes that I could be like them. I just wanted to understand, in a world so volatile, how you could traverse the unknown so deftly. How you could form the nebulous into something tangible, something less terrifying. I knew things had to change as they always do, but how did you always seem so in control? A trait I attributed to your affinity for the arcane. I tried to replicate it best I could, even going so far as to phase out of existence itself. Though I knew not the intricacies, I longed for them. Brought to my very homestead, I thought I had a chance, an out, some method of escape, but as I pushed myself even into the point of sickness trying to understand your world, you behaved like a child. What would drive you, I had no idea. I didn't know what I'd done so wrong, blaming myself for your actions. Deeply confused why there was a vampire at my door playing acoustic guitar near midnight like that isn't a blatant noise code violation in a lot of different places. Come on, man. Trying to explain why I, a child, was apologizing to an adult for their sour mood and aggressive outbursts that led to damage and dirtying of property that wasn't theirs. They have the ability to walk away from a situation. They owe it to those around them to live by a higher standard, especially when working with those less developed than themselves. But even still, my apologies only serve to enrage you further. I wasn't equipped to handle this kind of behavior. I shouldn't have to be. I found myself always coming back to the same table that my grandmother put here for me, putting to page any flight of fancy that would carry me to somewhere that could make sense. Places where life was fair, where we could seek joy in all corners of our world, where the complexities of living don't translate to the terrors of it. The arts were the closest things I could find to an escape when all else would fail me. It was one of your peers who would extend an olive branch, a life preserver in a sea of troubles. Mr. Silver Sweater may have had a deceptive name, but he would teach me many things about myself, and truly how things must be. Though still, no matter how I'd plead, he'd assure me that I was far too young to learn of magics. He was also kind of a dick about the trash. I'm not sure why, but people really seemed to hate my trash can. It was kicked over a lot, and often by people that I never saw before or after. They'd enter my property for the sole purpose of knocking it over. The Sims is weird. Frankly, within the scope of the few people that I knew, it was strange just how strong of a capacity you had for hatred toward me. Of all the things in all the world I could understand annoyance. Avoidance, even, but it was an animosity that most would reserve at least for folks that don't bring back their shopping carts. It's not that hard, and it's the right thing to do. You know it in your heart, do the right thing, and also wash your hands. Silver Sweater was a strange sort, unashamedly himself at times. For his faults, I admired that. We would reward his efforts through his imperfections via pizza in spite of our limited means, and also his weird hatred of my grandmother. He would reward me with the platonic affection that my studies prevented me from seeking within my familial relations. My maternal figure simply lacked the capabilities to teach me what I wanted, no, what I needed to know. In spite of this, she would do her best, and for that, I was grateful. Gifted with the finest in computing technology, I would cherish every moment. Developing my motor skills to the best of my ability in spite of the same vampire showing up at my door. My guy, most people aren't even up at this hour. Why do you feel entitled to my time? I'm not awake looking and hoping for you to fill the hours. I'm busy. Turns out, though, that even thinking about talking to him is enough of an invitation, and I'm fairly sure this breaks vampire rules. He also hated us, so not really sure why he wanted to be here. Wasn't hungry either. He then teleported out of my house to kick over my trash can. Seriously, why? Just why? I know multiple people that play The Sims who have reported no such trash can related aggression. I'm also not sure why they so frequently pick it back up after. It's like they have just enough self-awareness to realize that they're being an ass. After a few outbursts and somehow maintaining a positive relationship, I grew to wonder if he came over just to use our computer, because he started visiting often, and always to use the laptop like he owned the place. To better accommodate, my activities were brought outside. Something about touching grass once in a while. I was never sure of the cause, but our residence was mired with many fires. Usually next to things that were flammable due to the humble space of the location, but not usually things that would themselves cause said fires. To expand my horizons, she bought me a violin of all things. A beautiful instrument, but not one I'd consider myself talented with by any means. Something about the musical arts eluded me in my younger years, which would betray any later stage growth in the field. Even when we weren't home, though, she would have to leave work a concerning amount to handle random flames, which is arguably to say any, but I digress. Between classes in the arts, there was concerted effort by my elders to distract from anything meaningful. Many would argue that such extracurriculars are exactly that, meaning, but at such a young age with no real agency over comings or goings, it became mechanical. Expression is just repetition. It's not who or what you are, it's what you're asked to do and be. It's not you. Not really. There isn't enough time to find that part of yourself in between everything that's piled on. When you finally find the time to stop and try, it's hard to separate yourself from what you've made. You are not your work. You are not your hobbies. But what do you do when knowing that changes nothing? Life and time just passed by in our crumbling abode, small and yet still unmanageable. Sometimes the best that you can do just doesn't feel like enough, and that's okay. If you can't change your output, you can change your standards. Among the other issues our abode would suffer, we apparently had a werewolf problem. I would think ways of mitigating that kind of thing would be more common, but we apparently don't even have any sort of insurance against it, so the cost of things like basic repairs were hurting our savings. Slowly built and quickly burned on a teacher's salary. It wasn't uncommon to have visitors come by at random, which was mostly fine. Except I've never seen this woman before. Why did she feel entitled to access to my refuse, and more importantly, what did it do to you? It's just sitting there! But still, she did her best to provide, and as late as it wasn't long before my birthday would come and go. Longer legs and a longer reach. As scary as it would be, it'd be a chance at a new lease on life. Taking on new challenges that would have me tripping and fumbling before. Passing a surprisingly simple trial, one of your peers granted me what I had sought so long ago. Just a touch of something new. Something powerful, a capacity for true change. After all these years, a potential for control. They were proud of me. Silver Sweater would come to congratulate me, but not you. Still a disdain for me no matter how much time passed. I thought things could be different, but life has a way of turning when you'd least expect. When you'd least hope. She was bound to pass eventually, but of all things to the random fires that plagued our home. The untamed nature of the embers as the common person simply passed by pretending not to see what was happening, and yet plenty happy to divulge events after the fact. It sickened me to my core. I arrived far too late and had only to try picking up the pieces of what was left. Not even the emergency responders would lend much aid in the end. Left alone and lost, the music would course through my being, but would touch nothing along the way. What did you do, Morgan? The house was already in disrepair, but I didn't have the time to mourn. I got to work on the only thing that I knew. The nicest thing she left me, under the years of mounting pressure, was the ability to write. So I put words to page in hopes that the thoughts and feelings I could scrape from the inner workings of my mind could be worth something to someone. It wouldn't be much at first, but it would help to pay the bills that she left behind. The place wouldn't go forgotten to time as long as I could afford to live here. I was running myself ragged, through long nights and early mornings. Barely able to afford the time to visit her, despite being unable to afford somewhere nicer for her to be remembered. She gave me everything, though I had nothing to return but my efforts to not fail. It is rather curious that she'd choose to literally haunt me, but as my social meter drained rather substantially, she was one of the only sources of consistent companionship I'd have. Despite my lack of knowledge on repairs, or access to the internet to advise me on how, I began having to look over the homestead to the best of my abilities to fix the things that kept breaking down. I didn't have the time to follow through and clean, but it would have to suffice. With my grades constantly slipping due to me literally not being able to find my homework in my inventory and my near constant state of exhaustion, I had to make an effort somehow. My teachers and advisors all found it unsatisfactory. I would freeze my phalanges long after dusk to improve myself as a person, but it meant little in the wake of academic standardization and a lack of meaningful accommodation. Somehow, in spite of avoiding CPS via being a prolific author, not even my writing classes could save me the disapproval of the institution. They didn't want excuses, they wanted results, no matter how many children had to be left behind to leave no children behind. It became dire enough a situation that I lost touch with a man who was at least partially responsible for some of the few good things that remained. I didn't know why he was on my front lawn yelling and or staring at passers-by in the wee hours of the morning, but I was rather concerned. I also didn't know why he hadn't bathed, but he did eventually leave when he had to tinkle. He hadn't even asked to use my bathroom, or I would have simply invited him in. I'd like to think so, at least. Mercifully, though, while failing my way forward, I eventually made it into adulthood, where I was beholden to no guidelines beyond not to perish by my own incompetence. A high bar to evade, but the lack of schooling hours meant that I had nothing to prevent a nigh uninterrupted stream of continuing my work. This would largely result in me destroying both my mind and body for the sake of production, cycling through my various needs before energy would inevitably bring it crashing down. Each would begin and end with me firing up the old computer to try to get in as much work as I could to hone my skills and avoid the ever-present risk of bankruptcy. Though I had a reasonably sizable nest egg, I lived knowing that at any moment it could all come crashing down via one unfortunately timed hospital bill. So I would continue to grind away the contents of my mind and my very flesh alike. My very soul poured, then dripped, then agonizingly wrung into every word, every line, every carefully placed piece of punctuation, because the alternative was nothing at all. Having reached a proficiency level of the written word rivaling a true mastery, I found myself drawn to the visual arts. Could I find meaning where there was none? Sea of infinite possibilities all contained in a single blank canvas. Ready, willing, waiting to divulge any truth I should commit to its surface. Choosing the one true reality that would be its eternity in the annals of history. A choice that required certainty in the wake of the boundless. A choice that would drain me of life and liveliness even as others confusingly gathered around my homestead. Though I lay exhausted physically and almost entirely bereft of meaningful companionship, they gathered in the rain to greet a person who hadn't the time to afford them. Long after they'd retreated to their holds, I would emerge from my own, practicing carefully the arcane I'd discovered those years ago. An art in itself, and one that bends the fabric of reality. Perhaps with study, with dedication, perhaps one day it'll allow me an escape from the cycle, I thought. Even as I immersed myself, though, in thoughts outside my own, I found a feeling pervasive that haunted my waking hours much the same as those spent away from the physical. When was it? When did the arts cease to be a means of escape and make their way towards simply a means to an end? When did I become this? What felt like a lifetime ago, I was but a child, and as I aged, I changed. As all things must, but somewhere along the way, I feel like I lost something. Like when I look into a mirror, I'm not quite sure who it is looking back. In each canvas, slathered and coated in paints, put painstakingly by a practiced brushwork, staring into their core, I saw nothing. No essence of the person that put it there. It felt meaningless, mechanical. If not visual, then musical. I'd pour myself into the studies of strings, the harmonies and discord that rung through each glorious note and chord. Where sights failed, I would improvise. I could feel an aching from within that yearned for a voice that wasn't my own. A mouth that could form the words to shout its meaning. I would burden my hands with a weight I could carry no other way, for I lacked the skill. No matter how I tried, I lacked something to decipher and scream a message that bored its way through my very being, but made no effort to explain itself that I might aid its journey. Ever returning to those accursed forms, I studied. Anything to purge myself of this. I studied through the colds and heat alike. Ever under the watchful gaze of the gnomes that terrorized my home, even when I had not but blood to give. I tried to find beauty in the performances of others, them playing their hearts to a tune for them to follow, but not their pleasantries nor their garb made up for the vacant stares that their glass eyes gave back, showing a meager replica of the person I was. The person that I could be, reflected on a window to the absence that was their presence. Why don't they feel something? Why don't they sing and chant to the heavens anything? Anything that would mean just a sample size of who they are. Why can't I? Why can't I just feel something? Anything to dissuade the sense of ambivalence, the dread that would rise from the depths of a cold, agonizing apathy. I had nothing. At my core, I had nothing I could truly share that was mine. I felt so empty. So much so that I'd play the melodies of others, I'd hum their tunes and ride the sound waves they'd leave for me heartlessly, ever concerned that if I ever stopped, I would hear the deafening sound of silence echoing out from within my own chest. No amount of mastery could prove sufficient. Not for me. Not until the tools could overcome the artist would they be enough, because I could never be enough. When all else would fail, I'd pour myself back into the arts I'd already mastered, proving myself amongst the greatest. I'd gather a following as a powerful creative with any space I set foot into. As my fame would grow, so too would the pressure to be the person that they thought I was. The person I could not be. With them, my wealth became prominent. Gone were the days of concerns surrounding my security, and now were those that could never quite fill the gap in between. I'd become little more than a factory of one, producing all that I could to watch my finances grow, though there was nothing I wished to purchase. No vices to partake in. As the mind wandered and rotted away between my ears, I had little where else to turn, so to the occult I found my curiosities drawn, and before long, I was an expert in the vampiric. Eternal life despite the costs paid. To what end would one wish for forever? To be cursed with the knowledge one's life must find a meaning without end. A truly terrifying thought, and yet a nearly impossible feat for most to achieve. I would accept many things of many different flavors, many demeaning, in an effort to find a more limited definition to the self. With acting turning into nothing more than the same, I took my financial talents to the business world, and for my efforts, I was fired. As soon as I made the mistake of opening my mouth regarding the ethics of right and wrong, I was fired for trying to help people. And who was there to greet me when I should return? What was my grand reward for betterment of the self, but the same empty feeling? Oppressive is the infinite, for it has no bindings. You must carve a path all your own. The blank pages hold no words to guide you, no structure or meaning, it simply is. And the decision to not fill it is itself a decision that you must make without aid. You must bear the weight of every mistake, for it's yours, and yours alone. A journey you take into the boundless, and as you project yourself unto it, you find that its essence has etched itself into all that you are. When I look into the mirror, do I see my reflection, or does it see me? A fear, not of death, but of dying, not knowing what it all means, overtook me. In a moment of weakness, it wasn't me that started it. I could have stopped it. I should have stopped it, but when a vampire came revisiting my home all of these years later, I found myself back within my childhood, unable to control the magics that you taught, Morgan, the ones you refused to help me in. By the time I thought I had myself under control, seeing the Reaper for a second time, I found myself woefully unprepared, engulfed in the flames that protected me that night, whatever protection should mean. Also, why does the literal embodiment of death hate my trash so much? Is it the color? Is it just a kickable color or something? I grew paranoid that others might judge or even persecute me for what had transpired. I found that unwitting visitors that came to gawk at my residence would become wreathed in an inferno. Was it my doing? Was there anything that I could do to truly stop it, even if it was? I watched helplessly as a life was taken for the sin of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Something so innocuous, and yet her flesh would burn all the same. If it was to be my fate, then at least a moment spent fraternizing with death would become a moment well spent. And all of the hours over the years invested in learning to mingle with others came to pay dividends in a closeness with the Reaper, and an assurance that he, at least, probably wouldn't kick my trash over again. Unless he got bored or something. Hard to say for sure. Maybe just a couple more times or something. But unfortunately, where the first laid would not be where the last turned to ashes. To distract myself from the carnage, to believe that I was something else, I threw a celebration. A party to celebrate a pool that I had installed to get out of the house more. A dream that would become a nightmare when the magic gnomes that seemed to multiply when I looked away for too long, put a wall around the people. Powerless to help, it was a painfully long time before the first would fall to the bottom, unmoving. The first of many. Overwhelmed and underprepared to deal with the gnomes, the cursed figures upon my lawn, I witnessed fires spring to life. Others gathered to weep and mourn those that were falling victim to the pointed hatted plight, but I in my naivete was the source of so much suffering. I watched them burn. I saw them flail helplessly next to a pool, knowing fully well that if they were to jump, they wouldn't be allowed to leave. They were damned if they didn't, and gnome damned if they did, which I'm fairly sure is at least 60% worse than normal damnation. It got so bad, so disastrous that try as the Reaper might, not even they could cut away at the quantities of corpses that lined what was meant to be a place of peace and gentle merriment. It might also be related to this game just being really buggy. It glitched so many times, so frequently. Others would come, demanding answers for what transpired, but they wouldn't understand. How could they? They couldn't understand. They would be sent away in the only way that I knew how. In the only way their voices could finally be silenced long enough for a moment's peace to gather my thoughts, to understand just what I might do with the gnome menace. I didn't want to. I panicked with them, for the situation was out of the control of all involved, but I wouldn't burn with them. I wouldn't be the only one that would stand by. Even the embodiment of winter wonderment would stare with glazed eyes, uncaring, as if nothing was wrong, as if none of the magical beings of the realm valued mortal life. Nothing more than toys to be played with and thrown away by their hands. But if that's what they wished for, if that's what was required, then to them would be dedicated a structure erected to house the sins of these foul creatures. A place from which they couldn't escape. A room with no roof nor exit they could manage. Where they'd be lured and burned time and again would the bell toll. Time and again would a life be snuffed out, and what all for? Fire was the life giver. Our equal to the cold, our weapon against sickness, our tool in health. It ripped and sputtered as it took until there was nothing left to take. Only enough for the Reaper to free what remained, what could not burn. Ashes piled into urns as remembrances for what once was. I gazed into the fires, I stared into the inferno, and it took years. The heavens know as they cursed my name, the heavens know that it took years, but as my eyes settled on its center, I finally saw at its core that there was still nothing. I wanted to blame them. I wanted it to be their fault, but the fires came from the void. They burned so long ago, boring through my soul, taking something from me that couldn't be given back, and so I let it burn. I let it grow unhindered, feeding it new lives, new bits and pieces of other beings, trying to fill everything, with something so finite that it was a doomed goal from the start. I had no hope of taming the embers. But you did, Morgan. You could have fixed this before it began. In your arrogance, your recklessness, I came to be marked by your disgusting brand, a fire starter without a failsafe. My influence would spread like the smoke that filled my lungs each and every day that my eyes could fixate upon a new victim. It wouldn't be too long before even the gnomes would be overcome. At a price, but they held nothing over me. After some time, I learned that it was faster to simply lure people by way of pay. Were I to simply hire help, a butler would arrive at my door ready to immolate. And when they should perish, when they should expire, well, by the time I was done cleaning up what remained, I'd already have a replacement arriving to fill their place. There were some that I didn't want to get caught up in this. But through the haze and chaos, I hadn't even noticed until it was far too late that Silver Sweater lay dead by my hands. And he's not the only one. Your peers, your students. But you are different. I'm not going to kill you. See, I'm going to make sure that you live in a world that knows what happens when your kind goes unchecked. What a funny coincidence, they'll think, that you were the only one spared. As I tell the tales of how I fought against your wishes, how I begged and pleaded for something to change, and the master of the untamed demanded the status quo go on. The sage of fire. I know you never read my work, but it'll be your word against the countless who will support me in the first piece of fiction I ever wrote for the masses. And failing that, then we go together as a magical plight upon the mortals. You see, Morgan, I learned long ago that I can't fix what you've broken, but I can take until you're as empty as I am with the tools that you let slip into my palms. Goodbye, Ember, and may your legacy follow your namesake in the ashes of what you've left for those around you. But with that, I do believe we're done here for now. I'd like to thank my lovely channel members for your support in making these videos a reality, and on a similar note, is this one okay? I know it's probably not what you're used to seeing me do, but if you've made it this far, then I really hope you liked it at least a little. I want to try some stuff out, see what works, what doesn't. It was a lot of fun to put this together, but if I'm the only one getting something out of it, then there are other avenues to pursue. Importantly, regardless, I sincerely hope you enjoyed your time here. You probably know how to use social media, and I hope that means I'll get to hear your thoughts now and on future writings. It's hard to know without direct feedback, and change can be scary for all involved. Until then, though, remember to stay safe, spread some kindness in the world. Remember that if you're suffering for your art, you're not arting correctly. It should be many things, but not describable as at your expense. And I hope that you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.